Dare to enter Crow's Quill's books, where tales of forgotten realms and fearless souls come alive. Today's journey, Raven's Prophecy. The Elder Trials, chapters 8 to 9 by Mark and James Lindsay. Will you uncover the truth hidden in the shadows? Chapter 8. Struggling 20 feet above them was Ivor, in the clutches of a monster comprised of plant matter. Heavy vines had the teenage boy wrapped tight. Despite the intense struggle he was putting up, nearly his entire body was covered in leafy vines, including his mouth. The only part still visible was his wide, terrified eyes. "By the gods," Den whispered, his reaction mirrored by the others. This was short-lived as vines thicker than a man's arm slithered along the ground like deadly vipers. "Ah!" Den screamed as one of the green tentacle-like apertures coiled around both legs and flexed tight, then pulled him along the forest floor. "Help!" he screamed, attempting to grab at anything. However, the speed that he was being pulled meant that all he could do was flail about wildly. "Stop him!" Astrid screamed at Magnus. The smaller boy, without thinking of his own welfare, leapt. The tips of his fingers just connecting with Den's own dense slide along the ground seemed to stop, but only for the briefest moment. Then Magnus, too, was pulled along the ground. Astrid wasn't close enough to grasp Magnus and Den. Instead, she focused on the boy's destination instead, and in doing so, discovered the creature's body. An oddly shaped mossy mass twice the size of a large man that had numerous heads sprouting from within. The heads were of various sizes. Large, gaping mouths filled with sharp thorns that acted as teeth. The sightless heads swayed back and forth, as if some other sense was attempting to locate its prey sound. It must use sound to find its food. An idea came to her. Trembling fingers reached into the pocket of her coat. Since receiving the present last night, Astrid had been going through the secret compartments, discovering what her father had inserted in the finely stitched pockets. The one in particular that she was fumbling for had been meant as a locating device in case she became lost. Carved from a type of tree known for its tough timber, Astrid's father had created a whistle the length of her index finger. Hastily producing the small item, she nearly dropped it. She then stuck it in her mouth and with all her might blew. The sound of the whistle was ear-piercing, its shrill tone dying down with the contents of Astrid's lungs. It was as if time had stopped. Astrid peered around. The sudden lack of movement unnerving Den, and Magnus were lying on the ground, the creature's vines still wrapped tight around Badger's legs. Magnus wasted no time in jumping up and hacking at the thick vines and cutting his friend loose from the beast's clutches. Astrid watched the creature closely. The sightless heads that had been searching for food only moments earlier had frozen. They were now all fixated on the exact location of the whistle, right where Astrid was standing. Even Ivor was no longer moving, frozen, suspended high above the ground, still wrapped tight. Astrid took a small step to the right, almost without sound. Almost. The heads turned sharply, following the sound of her movement, open mouths, filled with thorns that served as teeth, and much to her horror, she noticed that they had grown easily twice their size. Despite the fact that they were not currently attacking, she knew that their situation wouldn't last for much longer. The creatures' mouths were eager for food, but what to do next? There was still the fact that Ivor was trapped, and the creature was incredibly fast and strong. "We need to create a diversion," Magnus hissed quietly. Astrid turned and saw that he had managed to free Den, and that they were now standing as still as she. Confusion. "We may not be strong, but we're fast," Magnus said quietly. Astrid nodded, understanding dawning on her. He was right. We don't have to overpower the beast. Just outthink it, she thought, staring at Ivor. "We need to all make noise, and once we start moving, don't stop," Astrid whispered. "And Ivor?" How are we going to free him? Den replied quietly. Just leave that to me, Astrid said, trying to sound as confident as possible. Although, truth be told, she hadn't a clue in how she was going to pull that feat off. Hopefully inspiration would strike. Hopefully. Astrid signaled that on the count of 3 they would spread out, bladed weapons at the ready. They all knew the stakes, and that the life of their friend now hung in the balance. She held up 3 of her fingers so that Magnus and Den could clearly see. 2. 1. They all leapt in different directions. The creature, who, up until the moment Astrid had blown the whistle, had been perfectly still, also whirled into action, its many vined appendages lashing out at the 3 small figures. Living in a village that had a sizable military presence that depended on its people to all pitch in and assist when danger was abound, this meant that most males from the age 9 and up were encouraged to participate in all manner of masculine activities, such as combat training and hunting. This fine-tuned the inhabitants to handle themselves in times of turbulence. Magnus, Den, and Ivor were exceptions to this rule, preferring other pursuits within Greytree that others deemed feminine, and because of this they had been subjected to their fair share of bullying from the other children. Ironically, this taught them to be quick on their feet, quickly assessing the difference between getting into a fight and avoiding confrontation. Years of this honing this ability into a much favorable skill. Astrid again was the exception. Years working in her father's forge had given her strength and endurance, as well as the ability to handle many of the weapons that the Grey Watch soldiers favored. Despite her petite size and appearance, she was easily the physical match for many of her male peers. So as the boys were dodging the attacks from the plant creature, Astrid was using the edge of her sizable knife to parry and defend against the beast's attacks. As this was occurring, the struggling figure of Ivor was being swung around overhead within the clutches of the creature. This went on for several minutes, and as much as they were able to evade capture, they were no closer to saving their friend. "Whatever you're planning to do, you better do it quick. We can't keep this up forever," Magnus called out. Astrid nodded. However, she was still no closer to coming up with a solution to their dilemma. She had been lucky with the whistle, its shrill, piercing tone causing it to freeze. Maybe sound was also the key, in defeating it as well. "Magnus, do you still have some of the black powder Valen makes?" Astrid yelled out. "You mean the fire starter?" Magnus replied, ducking and rolling from the creature's attack. "Yes, the fire starter. Do you have some in your pocket?" Astrid pressed. "I don't. I'm not sure," Magnus replied, running and jumping from the creature's attacks, and at the same time trying to check his pockets. The small teenager was just about to give up when he felt a small bulge in his jacket pocket. Reaching in, he pulled it out, holding up a small leather pouch. Triumphantly, "I've got it." "Toss it here. I've got an idea," the blacksmith's daughter instructed. Ducking behind a stump, she pulled a roll of twine from a pocket and proceeded to tie the pouch into a small, tight, compact ball. Then, using the last of the coarse string, Astrid inserted it into the opening of the pouch. As this was occurring, Ivor was being reeled in by the thick vine, his attempts to free himself proving useless. He could only stare on in horror as he was dragged towards the waiting thorn-filled mouths of the creature. From a small pocket within the jacket, Astrid held a length of flint and a small sliver of steel that bore sharp teeth on one side. With practiced ease, she drew the teeth across the flint, one-handed. A bright spark emanating from the encounter. She did this several more times until she was able to ignite the twine hanging from the mouth of the pouch. Satisfied that the coarse string was alight, she tossed the pouch as far as she could towards the main mass of the creature. It bounced twice before coming to a halt, a couple of feet from the monster, the twine still burning bright. Astrid placed both hands over her ears and instructed Den and Magnus to do the same, only just now realizing what their friend was up to. The black powder known as fire starter was a rather sought-after commodity in the lands north and south of the village. Created almost exclusively by Volin the sorcerer, it was rather valuable because of its rarity. But in the village of Greytree, its people had easy and frequent access to it, and inevitably this meant misuse of the product, especially by the children, who would do what Astrid had just done, only on a much smaller scale. With ears covered, Astrid waited and watched as the makeshift wick quickly burnt down. It was at the lips of the pouch, just starting to disappear. Here it goes, Astrid thought. Seconds ticked by, but instead of the reaction she was hoping for, all she received was nothing. "No," she whispered. Ivor was now nearly at the foot of the creature's bulk, the multiple heads appearing eager to sample their bounty. If only that stupid fuse had worked, Astrid thought. The image of the fire burning brightly in her mind, and how her plan was supposed to play out. Her thoughts were clear, almost real. It felt as if the possibility of the fire, igniting the contents of the pouch, would be real. Could be real. Lost in thought, Astrid was completely unprepared for the pouch of Firestarter to suddenly, and shockingly, erupt in an explosion of light and sound. There was an ear-splitting squeal of pain and anguish. The heads and vines of the beast appeared to shrink and wither back from the explosion, and in doing so released Ivor from its grip. "Grab him!" Astrid yelled, not wanting to waste this one and only opportunity. The sentiment was echoed by Den and Magnus, who grabbed their portly friend by each arm and dragged him to his feet. With Astrid leading the way, they took off down the trail and away from the screeching monster who was only now beginning to recover and thunder about the loss of its meal. They ran for their lives, not wanting to risk the possibility of recapture, not even daring to look over their shoulders. The fear of seeing that green monstrosity ambling after them, pushing Ivor well past the point of his own exhaustion. In the end, it was Astrid who insisted that they stop for rest, lest they risk the very health of the person whom they had saved in the first place. Finding a spot on the trail that looked safe, they helped Ivor to the ground, who collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath, his cheeks flushed, and eyes wide. "Are we safe?" Ivor choked as he struggled to keep an eye on the path behind them. "I'm pretty sure we're okay, despite its ability to ambush prey. I don't think it has the physical attributes to pursue any lucky enough to escape," Astrid said, herself feeling tired from their escapades. "There was nothing lucky about it," Den interjected. "He's right. How did you know what to do?" "Ivor was nearly done for, and we were probably next," Magnus added. "To be perfectly honest, I didn't straight away. I was lucky, and if it hadn't been for Magnus and the Firestarter, I believe that creature would have devoured Ivor, and there wouldn't have been anything we could have done to stop it," Astrid said with a narrowed brow. "But we did, and we all got away safely, so let's not brood on what might have been," Magnus said, putting a friendly hand on her shoulder. Astrid took a deep breath and nodded, knowing this to be true. She looked towards Ivor, who surprisingly appeared to be recovering nicely. "Do you think that you can carry on?" Astrid asked, and before he could reply to the sound of wolves howling in the distance, seemed to answer. He nodded quickly, the thought of ending up on the menu of some other beast in the forest not appealing to him at all. The others agreeing as well, they helped him to his feet. "How far is this river?" Den asked. "I don't know for sure, but if I had to guess, I'd say that we were nearly upon it," Astrid said, and whether it was that they trusted their fear, or rather wishful thinking, they were ready to believe. As they departed, a thought tickled the back of the young girl's brain, a thought that she hadn't considered until now. How had the pouch just exploded? She couldn't be completely certain, but the delay in the fuse would have meant that it had gone out. But when she had thought about it igniting the powder at that exact moment, it almost felt like she had made it happen. But that was preposterous. Wasn't it? Astrid shook the thought from her head. She was being foolish. They had all been under a great deal of pressure, and she was just letting her imagination get the better of her. Besides, they still had a long way to go, and by the close sounds of the wolves, they were far from being out of danger, Astrid thought as she led the way down the darkened trail, the sun beginning to set, and the temperature beginning to drop. Chapter 9. While Astrid and her friends had been battling the carnivorous plant creature, the other participants of the trial had been battling their own obstacles, with little or better results. After knocking out the Ragaboy, Erik had managed to keep his fast pace going, unhindered. He knew the dangers of the forest very well. He also knew how best to avoid them, which after all was the main priority of the trial: get to the finish line first. He had hoped to bag a pixie, but he knew how elusive they were, so unless one fell into his lap, he wouldn't waste the time to try and capture one. Despite his great progress, he knew that he still had many hours to go. It was going to be a long, dangerous night. Katla, Borg, Torben, and Rangvald had made slow progress as Torben Knutsen had taken a nasty fall and twisted his knee, so the three others had decided to take turns and help carry the teenage boy. Their quartet had turned to a quintet after discovering a confused and groggy Pace Raga, who had no idea what had happened to him. He had told the others that he had been running along the trail. Next, he had woken up, face down. No one said it, but they all thought it. This would have been the work of Erik Asolf. He wouldn't have thought twice in doing such a thing to a fellow competitor, especially if he considered that person a threat. And as much as they all wanted to do well in the trials, the thought of being alone in the thick of Nightshade Forest was very unappealing, so they had adopted the safety in numbers approach. Bjorn Leifson had experienced troubles of her own. During her way through the forest, she had accidentally stumbled across a large bear and her cub. The meeting hadn't gone well, with the girl forced to escape the bear's wrath in the opposite direction, during which time she ran straight into the Osborne twins. Eventually, the bear lost interest, but by then they had veered drastically off course, the three of them forced to work together and reorient themselves towards home. By the time Astrid and her group found the river, the sun had well and truly gone down. They all heard it before they saw it, the sounds of running water spurning them on, despite their fatigue and cold. But instead of arriving directly on the banks of the river, they found something else. It was the remains of an old village, smaller than Greytree, only half its size, but many of the same rudimentary huts and halls, or what was left of them. It appeared as if most had been burnt or ripped down. The destruction had occurred many years ago, as the forest had started to grow back. Many young trees and saplings now sprouting up randomly through the old village. The four youths walked in warily. To them, it didn't feel like they were walking into the remnants of past history, but rather stumbling into something sacred, like an ancient graveyard. The burnt-out husks of the huts looking like the skeletons of giant beasts who over time came to this spot to die. The teenagers stepped carefully and quietly, not wanting to disturb anything that might have set up home in the human's absence. "What is this place?" Ivar asked, his face pale in the moonlight. "I don't know, and considering it's less than 40 miles from Greytree, I'm surprised we've never heard of it," Magnus added. "By the age of the trees that have grown unchecked, whatever occurred here happened at least 15 to 17 years ago," Den said. Something off to the side had caught Magnus's eye, and he walked slowly towards it. After careful inspection, he held it up for the others to see. "I know what destroyed this village. It was dark elves," Magnus whispered. The others, including Astrid, gasped and stepped closer to see for themselves. It was a small axe, about 1.5 feet long, with a narrow, flat head on one side and a pointed, curved spike on the other. Black crow's feathers had been tied to the handle with leather cord. Although rare, the children at one time or another had been told about the savage and murderous race, who were known to travel in small groups and prey on bands of travelers, usually for the purpose of food, then using the remaining bones to craft as tools. Despite their size, which was a little over half that of a grown man, they were more than capable of combat against their human counterpart, due to their surprising strength amazing speed, and of course, frightening ferocity. The teenagers were at once concerned with their discovery. It couldn't be dark elves. There has never been mention of them ever attacking a human settlement. Never, Ivor blustered. You can see for yourself, Magnus said, thrusting the axe towards the chubby teenager, who refused to touch it. The legends may have never mentioned it. But the proof is staring us straight in the face, Astrid added. That's not proof. I'll admit to it being an axe belonging to a dark elf, but it doesn't mean that they were responsible for all this, Ivor said. Are you for real? Den said. It's more likely that they had passed through this area after, and one of them dropped it, Ivor suggested. Then what about the dried blood all over the edge of the blade? Magnus said, holding it up to the light of the moon, which there was clear indication of. Ivor shook his head. Animal blood, from a recent kill, that's all, he replied. Well, as much as this is all interesting, it really isn't important to us at the moment, Ivor said, changing the subject, more because he was disturbed by the find than out of desire to complete the trial. He's right, but once we return, I'll be making some inquiries into this place and what really happened, Astrid said, and took the axe from Magnus, who was happy to relinquish it to her. What now? Den asked. I have an idea. It's a long shot, but under the circumstances I think it might be worth investigating, Magnus explained. Well, don't keep us in suspense, Astrid replied, interested in what her friend had to say. The fact that the village had been built right on the river meant that to them it was their life's blood. Whoever destroyed the village were specifically targeting structures, but maybe, just maybe, they didn't destroy everything. Magnus hinted. Astrid immediately picked up on his meaning, her eyes going wide. A boat! That's brilliant, she beamed. Magnus blushed, but was pleased by her response. And if we can find one intact, we can use it. Going by the sounds, that river is flowing quite quickly. We'll be back near Greytree before we know it, Magnus added. The idea had appeal. This was evident by Den's and Ivor's happy expressions. Hey, if it means getting home sooner so we don't have to stomp around out in the dark. Then what are we waiting for? Ivor said, and immediately went about searching their immediate area. Utilizing timber and rags scrounged from the ground around them, they constructed flaming torches to assist them in their search, and in the spirit of safety, they decided not to stray too far from one another. They began the task of looking for a seaworthy boat. Some of the timber huts still had partial roofs in place, so they were careful not to disturb the structures too much, in case they brought a roof down on top of them. The longer they stayed there, the more Astrid felt spooked by the eerie quietness. Not once since they had been there did they hear any signs of wildlife. It was as if the creatures of the forest knew exactly what had happened and had decided that the evil that had transpired there still remained. The sooner they left, the better, she thought. Astrid was just in the process of pushing her way into a section of one of the huts when she heard the soft whisper of a woman's voice. Only it wasn't her ears that heard the voice, but her mind, and it was calling her name. Forgetting what she was out there looking for, Astrid followed the beautiful whispers that tugged at her mind, never once questioning their presence or motive. Her feet found a narrow path of moss-covered stone that led down to a secluded area at the rear of the village. A hut that was smaller than the rest, a mere shack that, despite its size, appeared to have survived the destruction of the rest of the village, although time and the elements had taken a heavy toll. Pushing back the rickety door, it swung inward with a loud groan, and Astrid stepped through into darkness. Inside was cluttered, but not messy. Shelves lined with an assortment of bottles and jars, a large fireplace that held a steel cauldron, and finally a small bed that was covered in thick dust, a testament to the years that had passed. The voice still beckoned. Astrid crouched down under the bed and pulled out a small timber trunk. A large steel lock had been latched to its front. The moment the blacksmith's daughter touched it, the lock popped open and dropped uselessly to the floor. Without wasting a second, Astrid opened the lid, her fingers seeming to know the way immediately. and from within they produced a black, leather-bound book. "Show me," Astrid whispered, and immediately silver writing appeared across the front cover of the book. It was both strange and alien to her. Being an avid reader, she had never seen its like before. She was about to open it when Magnus's voice broke the stillness of the night. Reluctantly, she slipped the book into her jacket, took one last glance around the interior of the shack, and departed, now eager to hear what her longtime friend had found. Astrid was the last to arrive, and immediately she felt guilty, as if they knew she had been up to something secretive and dishonest. But the truth was more that they were excited by why young Magnus had been able to find near the edge of the river, covered in weed and scrub, was a canoe, nearly 10 feet in length. The timber had aged, but it still looked in remarkable condition. After some additional scrounging in the nearby area, they also managed to find 4 usable oars. Within the hour, they were able to cut the boat clear and drag it to the bank of the river. "I hope all this work hasn't been for nothing," Ivar grumbled, but the others ignored his jibe as they pushed the boat into the raging water and quickly scurried aboard. Breath was held, as they prepared for the worst. But much to their surprise, the boat remained buoyant, and apart from a small trickle at the front, relatively dry. "I hope I don't regret this," Ivar muttered. "Ever the optimist," Astrid replied. They cast one final look at the old village before pushing off from the bank, the river quick to take a hold of their craft and pull them down its black course. That seals today's tale in shadows. We hope Raven's prophecy, The Elder Trials, has drawn you deeper into its enigma. Return soon to Crow's Quill's books, where the next chapter awaits, whispering secrets yet untold.